Every time I come up the stairs, I still, to this day, think, don't trip, don't trip, don't trip, don't trip. Okay. This sermon's going to be a little bit different because I'm only gonna preach at you for about half of a designated sermon length. If I stand up here and I preach to you for 30, 35, 40 minutes about chapter 7 of Tozer, then I am not doing honor to chapter 7 of Tozer. If you haven't read it, it's about doing faith. It's about putting faith into practice. So if I stand up here and yap about it the whole time, then we're not actually doing it. Now, for my fellow introverts in the room, I want to reassure you right now, when we put faith into practice in the bottom half, you don't have to talk to any person in this room. My fellow introverts, except for Jesus, and you don't even have to necessarily leave your seat. But we're going to, in that span of time, do what Tozer wants us to do in chapter 7, all right? So we're going to start with what Tozer is doing in the first part of chapter 7, where he's defining faith. But then after that, he moves into this really important conversation about how we have to put faith into action. We have to apply faith. And he talks about one way to apply that, and that's the chapter of the title. It's the gaze of the soul. Now, that's really abstract and poetic language. And so if you're struggling with that, I want to level with you. We are going to kind of sail into the fog for the first couple of minutes, but I promise you we will come out the other side. And then we're going to have a table talk to really make sure that everyone has a grip on what Tozer is talking about with the gaze of the soul. And then we're going to get into the simplicity of faith that Tozer talks about, and we are going to practice the gaze that he talks about. All right, so Tozer says in the opening paragraphs that faith is all important to the life of the soul. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Faith will get me anything, take me anywhere in the kingdom of God, but without faith, there can be no approach to God. No forgiveness, no deliverance, no salvation, no communion, no spiritual life at all. It's a key part of Tozer's definition of faith. But I don't want to step on anybody's toes here. They're also words. I think something that we don't need any more of in our churches is definitions of faith. And I think Tozer understands that as well, because if you haven't read chapter 7 yet, Tozer moves in pretty quickly. He moves pretty quickly through defining faith, and he moves pretty quickly into doing faith. And that's a crucial point of chapter 7. I think what we need more of in churches is people to help us put our faith into practice, and there are various ways to do that. Chris and I have a friend of Reset Ministries who has her own ministry called Friends on the Street. Some of you guys put your faith into practice by treating our friends on the street with dignity and honor and respect. Some of you put your faith into practice because you just have this gift of kindness and love for other people. And Tozer's talking about one specific way to put your faith in practice that does not require your interaction with anyone but God, no particular place, no particular equipment, and that's what we're going to do today. So when he gets into faith experience in action, he gets into his main idea of the entire chapter, and it's this. This is the thing in my little 15-minute yap session at you, that if you take nothing else away, take this. Tozer says, faith is the gaze of a soul upon a saving God. That's what chapter 7 is all about. Faith is the gaze of a soul upon a saving God. And for Tozer, there's a connection between looking and gazing and believing. And he talks about a couple of scriptures. He talks about Matthew 14:19. Jesus looks to heaven before he multiplies 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed over 5,000 people. And there's this beautiful part in that story where somebody brings to him just a feeble offering. It's just loaves and fishes. A couple fish, a few loaves, and that's it. But there's something beautiful in what you bring to Jesus, feeble as it might be, and what Jesus does with a simple gaze to his Father in heaven. And then Tozer talks about John 5:19-21. Jesus loves the Father and does what he sees the Father doing. Jesus keeps his gaze upon the Father, and he just does what the Father is doing. And faith for us is as simple as that. We keep our eyes on Jesus, and we do what we see him doing. And Tozer talks about Psalm 123, and I think this is one of the more substantive things that we can pause for a moment on. Psalm 23 is about seeking God's mercy by gazing upon him. This is not Psalm 23, in case you're thinking, oh, I love Psalm 23. No, this isn't the shepherd one. Psalm 123 is written by a psalmist on behalf of a community of people who have been humiliated and disgraced. The image of God that is in them has been trampled upon by very greedy people. And it's a really short psalm, and we'll read it. The psalmist says, "To you I lift up my eyes, O you who are enthroned in the heavens. Behold, as the eyes of servants look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a female servant to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God, till he has mercy upon us. Have mercy upon us, O Lord, have mercy upon us, for we have had more than enough of contempt. Our soul has had more than enough of the scorn of those who are at ease, of the contempt of the proud." Our psalmist is gazing upon God as a slave, a servant, in roughly 9th century BC, 8th century, 10th century BC, looks to the hand of the master because it is only from that hand that the servant can receive compassion and mercy and love. And there's a lot to be said about when we gaze at God, we realize that in this sense, we're nothing, and God is everything. God is the very source of life. In God, there is nothing that is not life. And we are dependent upon God for that life. And Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life." And he said he's come so that we all might have life and have it to the full. So these scriptures are about looking. And for Tozer, that's the first step. We move from looking, where we put our eyes on someone or something, and then we move into gazing. So you and I are looking at each other right now, but we're not gazing at each other. We're directing our eyes at one another, but we haven't yet deepened the look to a gaze in which we have this mutual gaining. I'm not going to split hairs about semantics and the difference between looking and gazing, because for Tozer, it's really just that simple. But here's how this looks from some of our historical predecessors in the faith. And this is the part where, if you've kind of been in the fog about the gaze of the soul, I hope that right now we begin to sail out of it, okay? So in the 1200s, we've got Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure. They were schoolmates and they were homies. And Bonaventure said, "Fix your gaze upon being itself. Take a cue from the name of God he revealed to Moses at the burning bush. I am who I am." God is life itself. There's nothing in him that's not life. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Bonaventure also found it helpful to gaze at Christ's wounded hands and feet, to gaze at Christ's pierced side, to gaze at the wounds from the crown of thorns, because in gazing at the wounds of Christ, we gaze upon the mercy and the love of God. Bonaventure also believed that gazing upon God is what we'll do in heaven for all of eternity. Now, Thomas Aquinas taught that God's love allows us to gaze at him in the first place. If he did not love us first, we would not be able to gaze at him in the first place. We would not have the space of prayer in which we can gaze upon God and draw closer to his heart. Next century, 1300s, Catherine of Siena believed that gazing at God draws us closer into union with God. And this always made her want more and more and more of God. If you've ever heard the phrase that God is closer to us than water is to a fish, it was probably Catherine of Siena who first said that. Fast forward 2 more centuries, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, and Ignatius of Loyola said these things. John of the Cross says that God first gazed at us, and he continues to gaze at us when we gaze upon him. Teresa of Avila also said that God gazes first at us, and we return his love by gazing back at him. Gazing at God is a way to pray. It's a way simply to be with God. And we can always find God through a simple, loving gaze. I just love that, because we can complicate our faith too much. We can get in the way of what God is trying to do in our lives and through our lives, when really, guys, it is as simple as this. We can always find God through a simple, loving gaze. We have to turn our eyes, our gaze, our attention, our look away from the worldly cares that we have, our daily anxieties, and put them just on Jesus and rest like the beloved rested his head on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper. That's faith. It is as simple as a loving gaze. And let's not complicate it any more than that. Ignatius of Loyola taught that prayer should begin by turning our eyes upon God's gaze at us, gazing at us in love, and then returning the gaze. All prayer for Ignatius should begin with gazing at God and keeping this simple, loving gaze. And then in the 1900s, we have A.W. Tozer talking about the gaze of God. The gaze of God precedes A.W. Tozer. It might have preceded Bonaventure and Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s. It's something Christians have been doing for millennia. We see gazing at God in scriptures, for goodness sake, right? We just read Psalm 123. So when you gaze at God, you're doing something Christians have been doing for centuries and centuries and centuries. And in this way, when you gaze at God, you're taking a place in a 2,000-year-long procession of Christians who have come before you, who have also gazed at God. And people like Bonaventure and Aquinas and Therese and Catherine and Ignatius and John of the Cross left behind what they learned after a lifetime of practice of honing their gaze on God. Okay, we're going to go into table talk right now, and we're going to solidify this. And then after the table talk, we are going to gaze upon God. Told you I wouldn't talk very long. That might not even have been 10 minutes. I have to step out of the way, you guys, because my words are feeble. And I'm going to step out of the way, and then I'm going to be replaced right here by a special surprise. I'm not going to tell you what that is or who that is. I'll give you a hint. It's over there, and it's covered. So take a moment and turn to your table talk. We'll put the questions up there. In order to help some of you who might be in the fog, I've ordered these questions from simplicity to complexity, right? So the first one, just in your own words, what does it mean to gaze at God? In your own words. And then we'll climb the ladder one rung here. What would happen to your life, faith, and relationships if you started to develop the habit of gazing at God? How would you teach somebody else to gaze at God? What would it be like to reach the point where gazing at God is just something you do throughout your day? Right? Like you always have one eye on Jesus. When you're at the grocery store, when you're at meetings, when you're with the kids, when you're driving in your car in Phoenix in the summer and everybody's honking at you because they're terrible on the road. What does it look like if you can reach number 4? What does that look like, gazing at God? Okay, table talk. Okay, let's come back. Could you give me some nods if you're like, we've got it. This whole gaze of the soul thing, like it's poetic, it's abstract, but we've got it. Give me some nods. Give me some shakes if you're like, no, we don't got it. And we need you to preach that whole thing all over again. Okay. Thumbs up, work too. Okay. All right, fantastic. Great. All right, so behind this is freedom. It's the title. For those of you who had our Reset Retreat, you know this, actually. Our last Reset Retreat. We have another one coming up on March 1st, by the way. Or is it the 28th and the 1st? February 28th and the 1st. I got to figure out that one right. So this is painted by our very dear friend named William Butler. And he does a lot of live art. And William Butler has this unique calling from God to enter a creative space with God during ministry events, just one of the things that he does. And his wife is a prayer warrior, and she is saturating his work in prayer. And William did this over the course of the last Friday and Saturday at our retreat, and it's called Freedom. And I'm going to show you this in a moment because you're going to gaze upon God using this, okay? I wasn't sure if I was going to say this or not. I'm going to say it. And if, you know when you pray and the Holy Spirit is guiding you, sometimes there are some things you want to pray and he just steers you off of that. Give me some head nods if you're like, yeah, I know about that. Okay. If you experience that with this prayer request for William on my behalf, then by all means, don't do it in your gazing upon the face of Christ. But please pray for William later, okay? William was very recently diagnosed with a very aggressive, life-threatening illness. So please pray for William's, dang it, healing. We love him very much. Okay, I'm going to uncover this, and then I'm going to tell you how this portrait came to be. There goes a clip. This is what you have on your cards at your table. William donated all of those to Reset Ministries. And he's he's a master of his craft. He's very particular about the cardstock it's on. I don't even know if he'd be okay with me calling it cardstock, quite frankly. So there's a rule. You cannot bend it. You cannot bend it. Okay? You have to treat it with dignity, honor, and respect. So William he constructs in layers. And when this began, it was a white canvas on Golgotha, the hill on which Christ was crucified. And there are 3 crosses. One here, and one here. Now the cross here and here, right in where Jesus' eyes are now, behind that is each of the 2 criminals that Jesus was crucified with. His gaze is upon them, you might say. And then the center one is up here at the center of the crown of thorns. And when I look at this, I could just stare at this all day. I see a beaten, battered, tortured, bloodied Jesus who will never give up on you, and his gaze is just fixed on you. It doesn't matter that he has been tortured. It doesn't matter what he's going through physically and emotionally. He refuses to take his gaze off of you. This is what I told you about when I told you I was only going to yap at you for about 15 minutes, because this is far more important than me talking about gazing upon God. So I'm going to step aside here now. We're going to take several minutes, and Jason's going to dim the lights and just put the spotlight on the face of Christ here, and you're just going to gaze. And then after several minutes, Nadia will come up with some church announcements. You can also use the card at your table if that's more convenient for you.